Hey everyone and welcome. We're going to spend the next 5 minutes cutting right through all the noise around Amazon S3 security. My goal here is to give you a super clear, actionable guide to locking down your data in the cloud. All right, let's jump right in.
You know, it's a question that probably keeps a lot of us up at night. The cloud can feel like this big, mysterious black box, right? And with data breaches constantly in the news, it's so easy to feel overwhelmed. But here's the thing. Securing your data in S3 is totally doable. It's all about understanding a few core principles, and that's what we're here to do.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the absolute foundation, this idea of shared responsibility. Then we'll walk through the 4 essential pillars you need to master: access control, encryption, data resilience, and finally, monitoring everything.
Okay, first things first. The single most important concept you need to get your head around with AWS security is that you're not in this alone. It's really a partnership.
And that partnership has a name. It's called a shared responsibility model. It just draws a really clear line in the sand about who's responsible for what. AWS takes care of the security of the cloud, and you handle the security in the cloud. So let's break down what that actually means.
The easiest way to think about it is like this. AWS is the landlord of a super high security apartment building. They're responsible for the physical security of the whole building. You know, the concrete, the walls, the guards at the front door. That's security of the cloud. But you, as the tenant, you're responsible for locking your own apartment door and deciding who gets a key. That's security in the cloud, managing your data and who gets to touch it.
Okay, so let's talk about locking your apartment door. Mastering access control is, without a doubt, the most critical part of your responsibility. This is all about controlling who gets to your data and exactly what they can do once they're there.
And the whole philosophy here boils down to one simple but incredibly powerful idea: the principle of least privilege. It just means you should never, ever give a user or an application more permissions than they absolutely need to do their job. Honestly, this one practice will dramatically reduce your risk.
So let's look at the core practices. First, and I can't say this enough, block all public access by default. Seriously. Second, for any new buckets, you should disable the old access control lists, or ACLs, and use modern IAM policies instead. It just makes things way simpler and a lot less prone to error. Third, really enforce that principle of least privilege. And finally, when your apps need access, use temporary credentials through IAM roles. Don't hard-code long-term access keys.
So how do you actually put this into action? It's really just a 4-step process. First, turn on that block public access setting everywhere you can, at the account level and the bucket level. Then, you got to go on a hunt for bucket policies that have a wildcard principle, that's code for allowing access to anyone, and get rid of them. Do the same for any old ACLs that grant access to the public. And finally, make your life easier by using tools like AWS Trusted Advisor to constantly scan for these kinds of mistakes.
All right, let's move to our next pillar. So once you've secured the front door, you have to protect the valuables inside. And that's exactly where encryption comes in. Think of it as your digital shield.
Now, we have to protect data in 2 different states. First is in transit. That's when data is moving between your application and S3. This is handled by using HTTPS, which you should always enforce. Second is at rest. That's the data just sitting on disks in an AWS data center. This is where server-side encryption is absolutely key. And here is some genuinely fantastic news. As of early 2023, AWS made this part incredibly easy. Now, every single new object you upload to S3 is automatically encrypted at rest by default. There's no extra cost, no performance hit. That baseline level of security is just always on. But you still have choices if you need more control. The default, SSES3, is super simple. S3 just manages the encryption keys for you. Done. Now, if you need more control for, say, compliance reasons, like you need to manage key rotations or see audit trails, you can use SSEKMS. That brings in the AWS Key Management Service. And for the ultimate level of control, there's SSCC, which lets you bring your own encryption keys. But just remember, that means you're totally responsible for them.
Okay, so we've locked the door, we've secured the valuables, but what about protecting against, accidents or even disasters? This is where S3's built-in durability and resilience features are just amazing.
Just look at this number. S3 is designed for 11 nines of durability. That is just mind-boggling. It means if you store 10 million files in S3, you can expect to lose, on average, just one of them every 10,000 years. The infrastructure itself is just incredibly resilient.
But AWS also gives you tools to protect against us. Human error. Or bigger problems. S3 versioning is basically an infinite undo button. It saves old versions of your files so you can always recover from an accidental delete. Object lock is a game changer for compliance. It prevents data from being deleted for a period of time no matter what. And cross-region replication automatically copies your data to a totally different part of the world for disaster recovery.
And that brings us to our final pillar. You've set up all your defenses, but how do you know if they're actually working? How do you spot anything suspicious? This is where monitoring comes in. It's your 24/7 security camera system.
Because here's the reality. Security is not a set-it-and-forget-it kind of thing. You absolutely have to have visibility. Without logs and monitoring, you're basically flying blind. This is the only way you can detect, investigate, and respond to any potential threats. Now, the great news is that AWS gives you this whole suite of services that work together to give you that visibility. I like to think of it as a three-step process. You need the raw data, you need a smart detective to analyze it, and you need a specialist to tell you what valuables you're protecting in the first place.
First up is AWS CloudTrail. This is your raw data feed. It is the official, definitive log of every single thing that happens in your S3 buckets. It answers those crucial questions: who, what, when, and from where for every single action. It's always step one for any investigation.
But come on, who has time to read through millions of log entries? That's when you bring in the detective, Amazon GuardDuty. It's the smart layer on top that uses machine learning to analyze those logs for you. So if someone starts accessing data from a weird location or downloading way more than usual, GuardDuty spots it and sends you an alert.
And finally, to know what to protect, you bring in the specialist, Amazon Macie. It automatically scans all your S3 buckets to find and classify sensitive data. It can spot personal info, financial data, even secret keys that got saved by accident, and that helps you focus your security efforts on your most critical data.
So let's bring it all together. Security is a partnership with AWS, and your part of that deal is built on these 4 pillars: mastering access control to lock the front door, using encryption as your digital shield, leaning on S3's incredible resilience for the unexpected, and constantly keeping an eye on everything with a solid monitoring setup.
And that brings us to the end. The most important step is always the next one you take. So as you look at these pillars, think about your own setup. What's the one thing you can go do right now to make your S3 security just a little bit better? Thanks so much for watching.